What's up? What's up? All right, so we're kind of breezing over section 9.3. You can skim that in the book if you want. But we're moving on to 9.4, influences on intelligence, the great nature versus nurture debate. So I put an article on Moodle that I would like you to read in conjunction with this topic. And so have your notes out. We're on page 3. Influences on intelligence. All right, so according to research, they surveyed a sample of over 1,000 psychologists and educational specialists, and here's the results. 45% believe that differences in IQ scores among people reflect both genetic and environmental influences. 15% think it's really the environment alone. 1% believe intelligence is determined entirely by genetics, and 24% say there's not enough research. All right, so how do we figure out if there's genetic influences on intelligence? Well, we look at kinship studies. We've looked at this before back in chapter 3, I believe. Remember the Thomas Bouchard Minnesota twin study? Where they looked at all this research. Well, he did all this research with twins, identical twins, and twins reared apart. And well, his findings were that IQ scores of identical twins are the most similar, even if they're reared apart. So what does that imply? Well, that implies that intelligence has a significant genetic component. It's not just environment, which flies in the face of the 15% in the survey who said it was only environmental. Other findings from Bouchard. For fraternal twins, siblings, parents, and children have a moderate correlation in intelligence, and children and foster parents and cousins have a weak correlation, which seems to indicate environment. The last point there, that environment's not a key indicator or a key factor. Heritability. The extent to which variations in a trait from person to person can be explained by genetic factors. So that's the definition you should put in your notes. Most say that intelligence is somewhere between 40 to 60% on how much of it's genetic. So that means about half the difference in IQ scores among people can be accounted by heredity. The third mark there, adoptee studies, IQ scores are more like biological parents early on, especially, than foster parents. So remember, adoptee studies are when you take children who've been adopted and you compare them to their foster parents as well as to their biological parents. And so you're looking at nature versus nurture. So some psychologists are scared of putting too much emphasis on heredity because that could lead to people being very fatalistic about their intelligence, right? If you say it's mainly intelligence is mostly genetics, so then most people are like, well, why even try? Excuse me, I had to sneeze. All right, environmental influences. So this is the case for nurture. Bouchard found that IQ scores are more alike for pairs of people who were reared together. So there is a environment component to intelligence, and that makes sense. Also, what we brought up when we talked about the Bouchard twin study was if these twins are reared apart, but they're reared in very similar type homes, then it might make the differences negligible. In other words, if a child is born, you know, and given up for adoption, but then it's adopted by parents who are similar to the biological parents, that it's not going to have that much bearing maybe on differences, if that makes any sense. But certainly environment does play an influence. You put a smart kid in a terrible environment with no access to books or education, etc. Certainly by the time that kid's 18, if he survives to 18, he's going to have a lot different intelligence, perhaps, than if he was raised in a middle to upper class American home, for example, with access to all kinds of books and good public education, etc. Now, notice that this also has something to do with how you define intelligence. If intelligence means your ability to learn, you can see how environment wouldn't maybe significantly hamper that, because your ability to learn is maybe less influenced by environment, right? Than maybe a different view of intelligence, which looks more at, incorporates kind of talent and achievement, maybe. Remember, intelligence is not the same as achievement. Obviously, if you're in a middle class home in America with access to lots of education, your academic achievements are going to be more. But does that really mean that you're that much more intelligent than you would have been if intelligence means how quickly you learn? So yes, it's going to affect, it's hard to say, just something to think about. Home and parenting. So parents are emotionally, verbally responsive to needs. This is what psychologists say is effective in helping your children in the area of environment for intelligence. So responsive to their needs, provide educational, enjoyable toys, involved in activities, vary daily experiences, especially during the preschool years. Home environment is well organized and the children feel safe there, and the children are encouraged to be independent problem solvers. So there's a lot parents can do to help facilitate the growth of their children intellectually. Preschool programs. So Head Start was a program started during the Lyndon B. Johnson presidency, and the idea was getting kids into preschool from underprivileged homes. And so I just noticed I'm kind of skipping ahead here because I had to turn the page. So I'll finish this and I'll go back. So increases IQ scores. That's temporary. Graduates are less likely to repeat. This is graduates of the Head Start program, which is a preschool program, basically for underprivileged. More likely to finish high school, attend college, earn higher incomes, decrease the likelihood of juvenile delinquency, and reliance on welfare. Yeah, so we're going to look at a preschool study as part of this preschool program piece. Let me back up a second, go to the top of page 4. The neuroplasticity or synaptic plasticity, we'll revisit that after you read that article I posted on Moodle. A case study, Genie. Remember talking about Genie way back, maybe chapter 1, section, I don't remember. I can't remember section 1. No, it was on studies. It was section 2, or chapter 2, I believe. Well, Jeannie was that girl that was horrifically abused as a child. She was basically kept in a closet, and she was basically beaten a lot, so she wouldn't talk. And they didn't find her until she was 10, 11, 12 years old or something like that. And she never really developed the ability to talk very well. So that's just looking at like, yeah, if there's a very harsh environmental surrounding, it can curb intelligence significantly. But that, I mean, Genie is obviously an extreme example. Then I have in there a word about public education, the rich get richer. So I know I've talked about this in history classes before, but just the idea, like in where we live in Michigan here, your best public schools are often in the most affluent areas. So in our case, it's like East Grand Rapids, Forest Hills, Rockford, and something that's similar about all those places is that those are well-to-do areas in the suburbs of Grand Rapids. So the way property taxes work is there's a chunk of your, if you own property, own a house, then twice a year you pay property taxes, and those property taxes, a hunk of them goes to the local public schools. The more your property is worth, the more property taxes you pay. Now the state pays every school a certain amount of money per student. That's why they have count day. I don't know if you've heard of count days before, but basically with a public school, they make a huge deal to make sure as many kids as possible are present on count day, because they submit those numbers to the state and they get paid X number of X thousands, of dollars or whatever per student to help run the school. So obviously having more students equals more money. They also get money from property taxes. So East Grand Rapids, which has higher property tax or higher values of their property, obviously more money is going to go to the school. The school gets more money. They can hire better teachers. They can have better technology, better buildings. And now we have this school of choice program where kids from public, from like Grand Rapids Public, which is not a very strong district, can choose to go to suburban schools, apply to go to suburban public schools, as long as they can provide their own transportation. And so, yeah, the schools in the more affluent areas are drawing kids from the inner city. They also get more money in property taxes, and so they provide a better education. The rich get richer, and then the worst schools in the area are losing kids. They don't get as much money. They can't get the good teachers. They don't have the good technology or buildings, and so the poor get poorer. And this is a very difficult thing. Some people are really angry that property taxes, they think that everyone's property taxes should be thrown in a big pool and split up evenly to all the schools. But then other people reply like, look, if I'm living in East Grand Rapids and paying extra, like to buy a 1,500 square foot house in East Grand Rapids, it's a lot more expensive than buying a 1,500 square foot house, in Belding or something. No offense to Belding. And so then the people who own that house are like, why am I spending all the extra money to live in this place if my property taxes are just going out to help all kinds of other kids? I want my property taxes to help my kid. So very complex situation. I'm just kind of giving you a crash course. Okay, let's move on. All right, other influences. So we're skipping the section, the notes on the Perry preschool study. I'll put that research up on Moodle as well, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow, the next day. The Mozart Effect, I don't have this in the notes, but it's just kind of a crazy thing, especially because I know a lot of you love music. I love music. Researchers show that university students who listen to Mozart's Sonata for two pianos in D major before taking a spatial temporal reasoning test performed significantly better than the control subjects. However, the effect tended to last only about 15 minutes and only with this specific piece of music, which is known for its complexity. So maybe when you're doing these online lessons, and maybe you should play some Mozart Sonata for two pianos and just see if that helps you concentrate. It's the Mozart effect. All right. Other things that factor, environmental factors, stress, lots of stress. Like if you had a very difficult home situation, for example, maybe there's drug abuse, alcohol abuse, or there's a lot of maybe dad lost his job, or family's going through a divorce or something that puts a lot of stress on the kids when they show up at school, or they're trying to do their academics. Yeah, their brains fried. They're stressed out by life. They can't be thinking about um, you know uh, neuroplasticity and whatever else. Nutrition, yeah, if you're malnourished, if you're chronically hungry, that can obviously influence you negatively. In a positive sense, learning new languages and playing musical instruments and reading like crazy. Yeah, the number one thing you can do to improve your standardized test scores is reading books. So it's not, taking more classes. It's just be a reader. You should be a lifelong reader. Okay, then adults and intelligence. So this is on page 5. So conclusions. I mean, top of page 5. I have conclusions. We'll revisit that too after we've finished talking about some of the other topics we skipped, so that you can do the reading before we discuss them. All right, adults and intelligence. There's a study done in Seattle looking at adults and how to maintain or continue to grow intelligence even in your middle to upper middle age and later. So they said level of income, education, stimulating jobs, intact family life, attending cultural events, travel, reading. See, there's reading again. Spouse with high level of intellectual functioning, flexible personality. All these are factors that increase or help maintain intelligence in adults. So yeah, education makes sense. Level of income gives you greater access. A stimulating job. So like, for example, teaching is a very stimulating job. I'm learning new things every day. I'm constantly learning. Usually, if in a school setting, I'm learning from my students too, because they're bringing up things. Hey, did you know this? Hey, did you know that? I read this somewhere. Also, just by teaching, you're always gathering new information, looking at new studies, etc. If your family life's strong, traveling, reading, can't emphasize that enough. I wish I had more time to read. If you marry someone who's an intellectual, that can help. And flexible personality means you have a mind that's open, that you're willing to learn new things, that you don't want to be stagnant. All right, in conclusion, so just kind of what we've talked about so far, but we'll come back to this. Intelligence is neither fixed nor unchangeable. That's the plasticity part you'll read about. Obviously, there's people who are strongly about environment and people strongly about genetics. So I just kind of put your genetics give you a range, and then environment and motivation determines where you end up as far as your intelligence. So like you're born with set parameters on your intelligence. Like it could be this low, it can be this high. And then your environment you're placed in and your personal motivation determines where you end up. Most psychologists work on how to do the best with what God has given you, right? And that's comforting. God doesn't demand of you any more than what he knows you're capable of. The Bible instructs us to use our talents and to do all things as to the Lord, to the best of our ability, right? If whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. And so if maybe you're doing online math homework and math is hard and it's hard to learn online, and you say you're doing your best and your best is a C. Well, if that's your best, then don't expect yourself to do better than your best. If you're working hard, then there's nothing wrong with that. So don't overburden yourself trying to be better than what the circumstances are dictating. You know, life's more. Solomon in Ecclesiastes 12 just speaks about how life is more than books and study. So you have to kind of allot a certain amount of time and do your best and be content with your best. All right, so we'll come back to these topics when we look at, after we look at the plasticity reading and the preschool readings.